Paul Farrelly, one of those former politicians and a colleague of Damien's. Tom, you mentioned Slow Horses, and one of the remarkable things about the Apple adaptation of the books is that how they very effectively resolve the very few plot holes or things that don't stack up in Mick Herron's books. So how do you approach that aspect of the process with your co-writers when you're which is in fact improving the book for the screen when you are adapting your own things? Have you had any memorable arguments there?
I think if I could take everyone in this room through the process from beginning to end, you just wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe the interrogation of everything that goes on. Because, of course, when you've written a new draft of something, I suppose the obvious point is the moment you move away from the book, you're in a new dynamic, right? The book, no one who's ever read any of my books or written a review or anything is going to know more about the flaws than I do. I already know where they are, I've been wrestling with them, and nothing's ever perfect. And, I wrote a book called The White Russian. It was one of my favourite books. I loved writing it so much. It's a detective story set in St. Petersburg on the eve of the revolution in 1917. A city detective finds 2 dead bodies in front of the Winter Palace on New Year's morning. The revolution's about to happen. He's the black sheep of an imperial family. And the whole kind of theme of this is a love story really, but the theme of the book is that he's the last person loyal to this regime that's falling to pieces around him. The homicide detective, the last person doing his job when the whole thing... So I came up with the idea, I did the research really exhaustively, I really loved writing it, really loved it. I felt like so involved in the world, went to St. Petersburg in the days when you could still research it intensively. If you get to the end, I hope it's okay, but you'll see that I didn't have the idea of the end in my head when I started. So you kind of, and it's not perfect, and I know it's not perfect. You start your process knowing where the flaws in your book are, but then you're in a new dynamic, and in the new dynamic you go on a new journey, and there are new flaws. And I guess it's the job. One of the things you do in the process is you have the read-through, and the read-through is candidly not that much fun if you're the writer, because everyone is gathered. Everyone from ITV, the directors, the production staff, all the cast, and you sit and read through it all. And then people have some questions, like a lot of questions, and we're like 2 weeks from the shoot, and I'm like, okay, wow, some of these are quite fundamental questions, but as you go on that new journey, new flaws open up, because you come up with a new idea, and that opens up a new flaw. So I think what I'd like to think with Secret Service is that we really, because it was a good process, everything was interrogated to the nth degree. Now, that doesn't mean to say that everyone who watches is going to love it. Of course, that's never possible with anything. But I feel like I could answer everything in it. And that's the difference between a good process and a rushed process. A rushed process is when you go to air with things you can't answer or flaws that you didn't manage to resolve. And when I watch a lot of other things, I might really enjoy them, but I sort of sometimes sit there thinking, well, no one interrogated that, or you can't come up with the answer, that doesn't make sense. And I find it kind of annoying, but that's what sometimes happens when everyone's in a rush.
Let's do down the front, because then we can pass between you. You sew the jacket on the start there.
Thank you very much. Brilliant conversation. Andrew Eborn, Octopus TV. I also occasionally do the RTS London podcast. Fascinating thing about creativity, which you mentioned about collaboration. And as an only child with ADHD, tell us the secrets about collaboration. And also, with the seismic changes with AI, do you see that as a great co-author or an existential potential threat?
I see that as an existential threat. I have absolutely no idea how AI is going to play out. Obviously, as we've been discussing, quite a bit of my life is in ITN. I don't think ITN is going to be very affected by AI, because the point at which you want news to give you AI to do your news is the point we might as well check out Siberia. So I'm not sure that's going to take off. But in the creative space, I mean, what happens when it gets to the stage, which seemed to me accelerating into, where someone could make a film for $1 million that stars Marlon Brando and somebody else, I don't know, Katharine Hepburn, weird combination, but you know what I mean? And it looks incredibly realistic. Now, at the moment, I don't think anyone would make that for all kinds of moral, ethical reasons. You know, although people have started to go in that direction, haven't they? But like, what happens when someone does it, and then people go to the movie theatres, and it turns out the audience is willing to turn up for it? What happens then? I mean, that's potentially millions of people out of business. So I am very worried about it. I mean, the secret to collaboration, I think, is I love collaborating. Lots of authors don't, because it's their work and they want, you know, it doesn't work to go into a screenwriting process if you're standing over your work. It's like, you know, no, but the novel, it's a new journey, and you've got to go with it. And you've got to sit in a room and be excited by other people's ideas. I mean, the good thing about it is that sometimes you're there and there's, you know, you've identified some problems. There isn't enough of this, or there's not enough tension with that, or that doesn't work, or whatever it is. If you're in a good collaborative process, and I've worked I think the thing I've almost worked hardest about in my career, if I'm absolutely honest, is to try and make sure that I'm always in a good collaborative process, because it's really joyful when you are, and it's bloody awful when you're not. And I know what both those look like, and I want to only be in the former because it's amazing. And it's just, when you're in a great one, it's fantastic, because you're sitting in a room with a whole bunch of people that really got great ideas, and you don't have to, when you're writing a novel, you basically have to come up with all the ideas yourself, and sometimes you're like, oh please, someone help me with this, it's like I'm in a hole and I don't know how to get out. And you don't really have to do that with a TV show or even with a film, because there are other people. I mean, film's a little bit more like a novel because you tend to have a single screenwriter and all the rest of it. But yeah, I really love a good collaborative process.
John Higgins, RTS member, but also soon to be graduate of screenwriting MA at Falmouth.
For you.
Yeah, my question is primarily, what's interesting is watching Secret Service, is the action and violence in it, because interestingly, 40 years ago, this stuff would be cut, there would be cuts to language, cuts to violence. I wanted to ask you about your approach in adapting the novel to screen in terms of the violence and action, because there are some strong moments in it which, you know, hit me, like the certain scene in episode 2, which is quite strong. But actually, how much of that is, you know, when you're working with a producer for television, I mean, how conscious are you of the effect that, say, certain specifics of violence and action will have on the audience? Because it's very much cinematic, like the Bourne Identity and Casino Royale. I mean, some of the scenes in this reminds me a bit of that. So, could you talk a little bit about your approach to that?
I think the thing about I remember watching Casino Royale and being kind of amazed by it, actually. And I know it came after the Bourne films, and the Bourne films had somewhat refashioned what a elevated Hollywood spy movie looked like. But if you think back, you know, no offense to Pierce Brosnan, who I always liked as an actor, but like the Roger Moore, Pierce Brosnan Bonds, I think Timothy Dalton came between, didn't he? But like they'd become a sort of comic book thing, really. They weren't real. And the two scenes that really stick in my mind more than anything else about Casino Royale is the one at the start where he smashes that guy's head into a sink, and then the scene where Vesper, played by Eva Green, watches him kill someone in a stairwell, and it really looks like he's killing him. And then she's in the shower afterwards, and he gets fully clothed into the shower. And I thought those scenes were amazingly well written, amazingly well shot, and amazingly well acted, and they were really disturbing. And I thought, you know, if you're going to do James Bond, I mean, he is a killer. And you've got to lean into that. So I think if you're going to depict violence, I don't really like the comic book variety much. I think if you're going to do it, make it realistic, because violence and death is, you know, is horrific. And you know, I don't like the idea of making the. I mean, listen, there are lots of dramas where somebody knocks 27 people out in the first 2 minutes, and that's fine. I mean, I enjoy it as much as the next person. But I think, you know, as I've alluded to, perhaps because of my day job, I'm more interested in things that are realistic. That includes violence.
I reckon we can probably do 2, maybe 3 more questions. You said.
Hi Tom.
Hi.
I'm a journalist as well, and I write for everybody, so I can sympathise. Just following on from that, how are they going to bring James Bond back to life after killing him off, and how would you write that? And also, you spoke in the past about your insomnia.
Yeah.
And you write all day, it seems. How on earth does that help you go to sleep at night? Because I struggle at night, you know.
Right.
And I think if you struggle with insomnia, you do realise that there are 24 hours in the day, but coming up with ideas at 4 in the morning is not so helpful, is it? So,
no, it isn't. I mean, I think James Bond first. I'm fascinated. I mean, Stephen Knight's a brilliant writer, and the producers are brilliant too. So they you know, fair play to Amazon. They've got a very good crew on board. And not to say that the last lot weren't good. They were very good, but they've gone for people who know what they're doing. So my sort of expectations are quite high. I'm not sort of bothered about killing off Bond. I mean, he's a fictional character. Like, you know, I actually quite like the idea of when a Bond gets to the end of his run, you kill him off, and then you get a younger version. If I was doing it, I'd probably start at the beginning again. You know, the young Bond, the orphan, the guy who's probably psychologically very damaged. I mean, that's kind of what they did in Casino Royale, I guess. I'm not sure there's another good version of Bond that's going to be really psychologically gripping. But who knows? Stephen's a great writer, so I'm sure he'll come up with something interesting. And I mean, it's a lot of pressure, isn't it? Imagine having that franchise. I don't know how much I mean, they're not going to ask me, but if they did, I don't know how much I really want to do it. But I guess it's an amazing opportunity. On the insomnia, yeah, I mean, from the stuff I was saying earlier, you'll see that most of my insomnia is to do with bigger life things, really, losing my parents, fear of loss, that kind of thing. And that's the stuff that if your brain's on that, you really aren't going to... Right, well, I'm very sorry to hear that. But you know, your brain is that's the stuff that your brain really does struggle to switch off at night. But what I would say is that I read so many books on sleep, and they all say different things. And then I read one that basically started by saying, what do all good sleepers have in common? Anyone want to have a guess? They get into bed, turn off the light, and go to sleep. And the point he was making, the writer, was, if you have an untroubled mind, you sleep light. And so what you can be really busy in the day, but if you're busy at midnight, well, you're not going to sleep. You've got to begin the process of winding down and switching off. So, like, if there is some big life stuff, then there are things, you know, therapy or psychiatry. And I went to see Britain's scariest psychiatrist, who asked me a lot of searching questions about why I was worrying about things so much. But so there's that side of things which has to be addressed. But other than that, it's just, I mean, like, put your phone down at 6 p.m. and don't look at it again. That would be a start, you know, stuff like that.
And was it Red Scorpion that turned into a film?
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, we sort of only just started. I delivered a script, but it's a as you know, it's a long journey.
Yeah, I think we can get one in the wire. Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Teresa Potocka from Sense of Future Pictures. I just wondered how much of your life is reflected in your writing, because of course I was watching Secret Service thinking it's shot in Malta, you're born in Malta. I was reading your Wikipedia page as I was watching it thinking, oh, that's interesting. Anyway.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, Malta has a great tax credit, as you probably know. But it's also a great place to shoot, great crews and all the rest of it. The book is not actually set in Malta, funny enough. That section of the book is set in Istanbul, but we decided on Istanbul's a nightmare to shoot in, and Malta's a lot more palatable. And it looks amazing. I think if you've seen it, it does. James, the director of photography, did. I mean, you know, we had a good budget, but I felt like that looked at times like an expensive movie, and that is a real tribute to them, because they did an absolutely amazing job of making a kind of a good budget look like something that was very expensive, I think. How much my life... I guess the slightly weird thing was, with Secret Service, I said I had the idea, I guess it must have been 2017, and then I wrote it in kind of quite a fevered way. I was really into the idea. I thought it was the best idea I'd ever had. It was a catchy idea. I wanted to get it down, and it was just very, very clear in my head, so I wrote it very fast. And I think if you read the book, you'll see that Kate, the character, looks like someone skating on the edge of a breakdown. And then I had a breakdown, and had to take 3 months off work, and, as I said, go to Britain's scariest psychiatrist to get myself painfully rebooted, which was a great process. But it does feel weird when I read the book now, or if I go back and read the book, because you kind of think, it was almost like this had become a sort of mirror of my psychological state of mind. I'm sort of writing a book about a woman on the edge without really noticing or understanding that I was on the edge. And then if you read the second, there's obviously a trilogy, the second book and the third book, she's had a breakdown and she's got insomnia and she's, or she's in the middle of it. So I was sort of writing that more consciously as a reflection of something I'd lived through. But the first one was a sort of unconscious reflection of my state of mind, which feels quite weird when I look back on it now, actually. But I guess that's what writing is sometimes. It's where you go to express something in yourself that you maybe can't articulate as clearly in everyday life. I don't know if that made any sense, but...
Well, we're going to finish there because Tom now has to jump into a taxi and go straight to his, should we say your third job? His part-time job as presenter of ITV News at 10, and there's not much news happening today, so it'll be very quiet. But I want to say thank you so much to Tom, who will be signing, I think, very briefly, copies of Red Scorpion downstairs, but it will be brief because, again, there is news happening. Who knows, there may be a new Prime Minister in this time that would have been sitting in this room. But Tom, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Wonderful to hear all about your process, and what a fantastic insight into the process of making television. Thank you.
Thank you very much.